Welcome to the Driven Dads interview series of the DadPerfect podcast. In this series, we focus on highlighting driven dads who are successful both professionally and at home, and we're going to discuss their successes, their challenges, and learn from their advice and experiences. And today we're talking with R Tyson Scott. He is the father of three and a successful podiatric surgeon in Salem, Oregon. Did I say that right, Tyson?
You did, absolutely.
Okay, I had to practice. Podiatric surgeon in Salem, Oregon. Tyson is actually my brother-in-law. I've known him for 23 years. He was one of the very first people I thought of when I decided I wanted to do this interview, because I've always been very impressed with him as an entrepreneur and also as a dad. And he's a self-made entrepreneur. But in addition to being a podiatric surgeon, he also has his own podiatric clinic. And he's a real estate developer and an investor. He was the president of the Oregon Podiatric Medical Society from 2020 to 2022. He's an active member of his church. He loves to travel the world, and he's an avid worldwide surfer. So Tyson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate being here. It's an honor to be your first guest. And I love what you're doing here. When I heard that this is what you wanted to do, it made perfect sense. Having an amazing dad, help us to be better dads. It's great. It all makes sense. Yeah.
I love doing it. We go through a lot of life where we try to figure out what we want to do. And I've done a lot of different things, a lot of different business things and entrepreneurial things. And it's fun to find something that starts to really ring true, right? Versus just continuing to try different things. So I am excited about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always like to explain the name of this podcast is DadPerfect. And I chose that name not because we're trying to create perfect dads, because we know that there's no such thing, right? There's no such thing as a perfect dad. There's no standard that we can all measure ourselves against. There's no test you can take. Like, you can't go take an exam like you had to do to become a doctor, right? You can't, there's no standardization of the perfect dad. But we do believe that every dad can become the perfect dad for their family, right? For their unique circumstances and their unique situation, that every dad has the ability to become that perfect dad for their family. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit here, is some of the things that you've done as a dad to balance all of these things that you've been doing, right? The draws on your time, your work, going to school back when you were younger, and then growing your profession and your clinic and your investing and all these other things you've done. So to jump right in, let's just start with talking about, Tyson, what are some of the specific things that you do now or that you did when your kids were younger to make sure that you were putting your family first?
It is so interesting thinking about when they're younger and to see about where they are now. My kids just turned 16. I have twins that are 16, and then I have an 11-year-old. And it's different how things change. And I think part of, it's your time with the kids have changed as time goes. The specific things that I feel like putting the family first. For me, I will say, again, I'm not any perfect dad, but I have found that we find time to schedule joy. I read a good book, and it talked a little bit about, it was called The Power of Fun. It talked about what is fun. Fun is playfulness, connection, and flow. So it's these things that you get pretty much the opposite of social media, but it's these things that you have to create. And luckily for me, my wife and I, we decided that the best way to spend time with our family was to schedule joy. It was to schedule time. And it ended up being, in the beginning, that was a walk with the kids. That was time when in between studying like crazy, or, rounds in residency. And, everyone has their job and has their activities that keep them busy. And, scheduling that joy for us also meant, for us, was traveling and making that a priority for us, traveling with the kids and forcing them to be with us and forcing them to put away other things, be in a different environment, and try to change their environment enough that we have experiences, like forced experiences.
You
Yeah.
know, I think that's such a great thing. I've seen a lot of dads who travel a lot with their families, but it's like they just travel, they still don't work on spending time with their kids, right? I know someone specifically who they travel all the time, but they travel and then they just give their kids a bunch of money and say, go shopping while mom and I go do this, right? It's so they don't have that same experience that you are describing of being intentional, taking your kids out of the world into a place where you can be focused and together. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel there was a couple things thinking about this interview. I also thought when I was 20, the traveling was very different from when I was 40. But because my wife and I intentionally said, this is how we want to spend time with our family, we had always budgeted money for that. And I really do feel like time off, being with the family, is available at any age and really any monetary, any time in your life. You just have to be intentional about saving money for it.
Yeah.
Recently, we've been saving 10% of what we make specifically for traveling, because as the kids get older, it gets a little more expensive. Yeah, I think, and I would say, again, things have changed, but early on, I could barely find time to sleep. It was a lot of rounding at the hospital. When you're a resident, you want to get in as much surgery as you can. You want to learn as much as you can. And then, and then after you start a new business, I picked up a new practice and trying to just work it to get the word out and marketing. This is just the same with any other business too. You have to be able to be in the business. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents might also think that, okay, I'm in the business, I'm not being with the family. But when you make this intentional time, you come back and a lot of times you see, okay, the kids are, especially now, they're doing homework or they're doing sports or they're doing other things like that. And there's times where you can say, okay, I'm going to schedule, and I know that this is happening. I understand the kids' schedule, and this will be a time that I can really put all into the business. I can schedule this time and working specifically with my wife to say, when is this happening? What's going on? And then making sure that when these events happen, I'm there, or I say, no, I'm going to miss this, but you better believe I'm going to be at the next one.
Yeah.
So intentional scheduling, I guess. Yeah.
I heard CEO, and I wish I could remember who it was, who once described moments as rubber moments versus crystal moments, and being intentional about knowing the difference. Right, there are moments in your kids' lives or in your wife's life that are rubber, meaning if you miss it, you can bounce back. Right, it's not going to break the relationship, but then there are crystal moments that you need to make sure you're there. Because if you miss a crystal moment, you could break something that's very difficult to bring back. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference, but it's spending that intentional time with your kids, planning it with your wife, and you start to learn. I think you start to learn which moments for your kids are crystal and which ones are rubber, and they're different for each child. Right? Like for my oldest son, the moments I need to be at with him were very different than where I need to be with my daughter. With my daughter, they have to be, it's like not every little thing, but she really values time. And so being there for her, for things that she's put a lot of time into, even if it's just what might be considered a small dance competition, but if she put a lot of time into getting ready for it, then that's a really big deal for her. Where my son, he's more of like, well, if this isn't a big deal, you don't need to be there, even if he puts a lot of time into it, right? So yeah,
it's beautiful way to say that, crystal and rubber. Yeah,
I love it. I'm gonna look. I have to look up who it was. It was like the CEO of. This is awful to even reference something I can't remember the source, but I'll look it up and post it on, and maybe the notes or on another podcast or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really good. So you talk about doing things intentionally with your kids, and you plan that with your wife. But also, I know that especially when you were younger, you kind of referenced how busy you were going to school and trying to do everything. I'm sure your wife was a huge part of helping you be the father that you are and that you were then. were there things that you did intentionally to strengthen and maintain that relationship with your wife while you were going through these difficult times of building your business and going through school?
I think one of the best things I heard was uh, I, I I try to read a lot about books and things that can help out as a father, and one of the best things actually came from your wife um, and my sister, and it
Yeah.
was it's just love languages.
Uh,
And one of these things is uh, when Jen, my wife, her name is Jen, and she does do a lot for us, and I cannot be gone as much as I am and couldn't do the businesses that I do if it wasn't for her help. She grew up in a family where her dad was home at 5 o'clock on the dot, and you could like start dinner that way. Um, and and I wasn't always that way, and I told her, when you marry me, it won't be that way. So and she understood that, and we from the very beginning we kind of said, okay, I won't have that normal life, and it's going to be late nights and it's going to be rough, but if you tell me I need to be there, we'll make sure we're there. I think for her love language is she needs, I will do this and I will help you out, but I think her biggest thing is stuff like cleaning. More recently, we had one of those glass showers, and it will build up water on it, and he has a
yeah.
squeegee. And something as simple as, I hate that dumb squeegee. It's so dumb, and she wants that every time I shower. You have to squeegee it,
Yeah.
and I'm squeegeeing the shower. I'm just thinking, this is for Jen. This is for Jen. And I was like, I can't do what I do if it's not if I can't make her happy. Um, and so I think it's a give and take, just like anything. But as soon as I understood what she likes and what works for her, I feel like she's able to help me be better as well.
I think wives are such an important part of obviously being a husband with your wife, the relationship you have with your wife, but as an entrepreneur or just someone who has a busy work schedule, that partnership is so critical, and building that relationship is necessary because it can create a lot of conflict. If you didn't know that about the squeegee, right, that could become, it's a small thing, but it could become a real, burr in the saddle, to use that analogy, right,
Yeah.
of your relationship. Because it would be easy for her to say, "Oh, Tyson doesn't even care enough to squeegee the shower," right? And I'm doing all this work, but it's great that you recognize that and do those things for her. Yeah. Of Together with you and Jen, now so your kids are older, right? You've like I said, they're teenagers, and I'm sure you're starting to think about their futures. They've been developing talents. Been preparing for things. They're going to be going into high school, I believe, or maybe they're already in high school. Um,
Yeah.
but are there any things that you have done specifically to empower your children to become their best? Because I think that's one of the key things that we have to do as fathers, right? We provide for their well-being, we protect them, and we do things. But as they get older, we have to start empowering them to leave the nest, right? To leave the nest and go out in the world and be their very best. So back to the question, are there things that you have done together to help your children be empowered to be their best as they grow?
Yeah. I there's a couple of things that I was thinking about with this, and one of the things is I love the idea of you learn from your mistakes, and we talk about. There was another great book called The Power of Regrets, and what you learn from what your mistakes, and so you need to make these mistakes, and we really try to tell our kids, you need to get out there so you can learn, and when you fail, that's when you learn the most, really. Um, and one thing I would say as an entrepreneur and just a busy person, what will happen is with time, if you're doing your job right, you're going to be more successful. And unfortunately, that's kind of comes at a time when the kids are teenagers. And it's a frustrating time because you want to give your kids so much, but you just don't want to spoil them. And there's also there's that yin and yang that you got to have between giving your kids too much and spoiling them. And recently we had an issue with a car, and we had to make sure that they understand, okay, we're giving you some freedoms, this is our car that we're buying for you. And it was a big hassle, like what we get them, what, if we're even going to get a car, you work for it. And there's a whole bunch, and different parents will do different things. But in our situation, it worked out as with the twins that we get one car. It's our car that we let them use and all that. But the biggest thing is we really hunt on the fact, it's yours. You need to be responsible for it. This can be a tool or this could be a weapon, depending on how you use it. And it's just like anything in life. You can take it and you can drive crazy and you can get tickets and you can learn. And now you're going to start paying for the insurance and make it in everything else. I think through experiences is how they learn best, at least for our kids. And we try to push our kids into as much experiences that we can. One thing is just a dumb little thing. I'm driving with my daughter and I'm sitting right next to her and we're driving. It's late at night and this deer comes up right in front of our window and hits the front light and then just kind of runs off. And she freaks out. She pops on her brakes and she stops and she's just like frozen. And I look over and I'm like, oh my gosh, you did it. You got your first deer. And I was there to experience it with you. And instead of just saying like, it's just
why
like,
did you hit that deer?
Why did you hit that deer? It's like, you could have destroyed our lights and all that stuff. It's like, no. Let's look at this and say, this is our experience. You just had a great experience. You did the right thing. You put on the brakes. You did drive off the road. We're all alive. We're going to be okay. And looking at it that way, taking that spin on what experience, what do we learn from that?
Yeah, I think it's so important to keep experiences in perspective like that, because it is so easy to get upset, right? Like for some reason, for guys, especially with cars, right? It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's like, you don't want your cars to ever get scratched or dinged or, when it happens, it's hard to not get a little upset. But to keep those in perspective is really important. We had it wasn't in a car with a deer, but our older son had a goal to have a 4.0. He wanted to graduate with a 4.0 from high school. And I can't remember if it was his sophomore year or his junior year, but he got an A- in one of his classes in one term. And he was really disappointed, right? Because like his goal was now gone, right? And I remember that we kind of took the same approach, like, yes, you got your first A-. You're not perfect, and that's okay, right? Like, what did you learn from this? How can, why did you get the A- or whatever? And it was amazing for him because he mentioned to us later how getting that A-, he was scared, not from us, but like just because he said that he wanted that goal and he felt like he was a failure. And he later shared with us that it was so liberating to know that he doesn't have to be perfect, that he can make mistakes and you can still accomplish his goals and he can be what he wants to be, even if the steps along the way aren't perfect, and he's, he continued to do great. The A- had absolutely zero effect on anything that he wanted to do. But at the time it seemed like a really big deal to him, and keeping experiences in perspective and learning from him I think is great approach.
And it's so interesting seeing kids. And again, I think if I think about what your viewers think, or listeners will say, in the beginning, for a dad, I feel like when the kids are born, you want to be there. You want to do so much, and there's only so much you can do. You don't have the physical things that a woman has that the kids need. So when we were younger, Jen said, all right, I got to do what I do. How can you help? And I said, you know what I'll do? I'll take care of all the poopy diapers. That's me. You got poopy diapers. That's me. You call me, like, I will do it anytime. And I remember coming back from a late night trauma and it was late. I was super exhausted. I come home and these kids are walking around with these huge diapers. Just needed to be changed like 6 hours ago. Jen had hurt her back and she just laying on the ground and she couldn't do it. And I felt so bad. So I'm there, I'm changing the diapers. I mean, there's so many times I was doing this externship in Texas out in the middle of nowhere. And all I want to do is say hi to Jen. And she's like, these kids, they need their diapers changed. And I was like, oh my gosh, you've been driving for 3 hours. You didn't change your diapers? And I was like, no, this is my job. Hey, I told you this was going to be my job. And then you come out and they've got diaper rash and they're crying. I'm like, I just want to be with my kids. And they're crying because daddy's wiping their diaper rash. And then it goes from this where, I could just do one thing in the relationship. And then it grows to where they really, dad can, you can be on dad's back. You can ride, dad can throw me up in the air. And it just progresses. And it's interesting because we're talking about cars and it triggered it for me. As soon as they turn 16, sometimes they'll get this freedom and you're like, oh no, it's Friday night. I'm just all by myself. Like, but don't you need me anymore? Like, are you sure you don't want to like hang out at our house?
Yeah.
And you're seeing this gamut of changes with it. And you enjoy those little times. And some of the times, like you said, will be rubber and some will be crystal. And it's different for each kid, for sure.
It is. And sometimes it can be so hard to know the difference. It's, yeah. A lot of times they'll let you know. The kids will let you know if you listen. Yeah.
Another thing I thought was interesting too is what you say about each kid is so different. If I was thinking back, I think about like with each kid, the emotions just range too, and you see that these kids just don't have a prefrontal cortex that's developed, and you can tell them. But talking about experiences, sometimes you say, you know what, you need to go experience this. I can tell right now that it's not sinking in your head. Go ahead, go do that. Now, I'm not saying rob or bank,
Right.
do
Anything dangerous or
dangerous things, but sometimes these little things, they learn a lesson and they come back and they say, yep, you're right. And I think, yeah, that's a great way to learn.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, kind of follow-up question, you talked about some of the agreements that you have with Jen, kind of roles and rules, if you want to call them that you would each kind of follow. Is there anything specifically in your life, just for you, that you've had to set, any rules that you set for yourself to help make sure that you didn't miss something that was important or not fulfill your roles as a dad because of the demands of work or anything like that?
We have, I think it's really, when I thought about this, I thought about it's really easy to try to be everywhere every time. When I work at the hospital, sometimes with church activities too, I'm active in my church. Sometimes at the church and the hospital, it's the same sort of idea where they will suck all your time if you allow it. There will always be sick people. There will always be people in need. Can be calling at all hours. And it's simple, if you allow it, it will suck your time. And there's times where you have to just realize, no, I need to say no. And it's just power of saying no too. Jen has this, she has a secret thing with me. If she calls 3 times, it's like, you drop whatever you do and you're calling me right now. And she hasn't had to use it as much, but I remember being in the middle of surgery. She calls me 3 times. I drop the phone and I call and find out that she was trying to make this experience for the kids, and she's on a bus in the middle of nowhere and she has no idea how to get home. That's the kind of experiences. And now, again, those calls come a little bit less, but the idea is just the same, that at any time you need to be able to drop it. And what we decide might be, like you said, crystal memories. We need to be able to stop and change what we're doing with that. I think for me personally, what I have learned too, it does help that I'm a doctor, but what I've learned is I have seen, when we first had our triplets, we were in a multiples class and we were in San Francisco, and we see these parents, for whatever reason, couldn't have kids for later or chose not to have kids later. And you see these parents are in their 40s and 50s and they're just starting to have kids. It was such a blessing to have kids so young, and we were so dumb, and we had to just figure it out on our own. We see these parents, and one of the biggest things I thought about too is I feel like you kind of owe it to your kids. One of the rules for me is I need to be able to work out. And it sounds like a dumb thing. How good is, you can have all the money in the world and you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have if you can't physically step up, be with the kids, kind of more or less, you don't have to do it at the same speed they do, but you have to be able to be active. I feel like being healthy, you kind of owe it to your kids to be as healthy as you can. I see a lot of people coming through the office, as you can imagine, diabetes, other issues, and the family's taking care of them. They can't be their best because their health is not there. And it's something that you wouldn't think about, but that's for me. I feel like what are kind of rules for me is I have to get my exercise in. It makes me better. And for me, it just works that I work out in the morning.
Do you do that by yourself, or do you ever involve your kids and your family with you when you do that?
So every time in the morning, it is actually great to have it by myself, have my time. People talk about meditation and stuff. For me, this is actually my way to do what I want to do and have my selfish time. So after that time, I can spend whatever time with the kids. And after I have my selfish time, I listen to what I want to listen to. I kind of do what I want, and no one else is awake.
Yeah.
And so then after that, I can drive my kids to school. After that, they drop off at school. My schedule has worked where I can get off right when they're getting off. And you can still be productive. I mean, when kids are in school, you can still be working and still do what you do and schedule appropriately.
I've found now that I work from home a lot more, I think a lot of us do because of COVID, we've experienced working from home a lot more. And it's easy to let the family interrupt you, like you say, your patients or members of the church and things like that can come in and they can interrupt, and the family interrupts. I've found that when I have guidelines and rules on, kind of like my time segmented, just like you're talking about, okay, this is when I exercise, this is when I read, and I do it when I know I can do it. The kids aren't going to interrupt me. And then I also say, okay, this is my work time. And I identify it. I'm amazed at how much I can get done in 4 hours of work time because I know I have to get it done, because once the kids come home from school, forget it, right? Like I can't do it. And so, yeah, I think setting those time limits on, segmenting when you can do certain things is very helpful, whether it's exercising. I don't exercise as much. Exercising has never been enjoyable for me. It's a funny thing. Like, I know for some people it's that way. Like, some people love it. Some people hate it. For me, it's just like, oh, I have to go exercise again.
Oh,
right?
and I wonder but I'm sure you have something that you enjoy to do, right?
I do. Well, so for me, I like to take mental time off. So I've since learned like introverts and extroverts, and then there's other personality types within introverts and extroverts and all sorts of things that need different types of recharging, right? So my recharging is mental. I have to do something where I shut my brain off from the typical activities and change it, whether it's going for a walk and listening to a podcast that's totally different than what work is, or sitting down and reading. Sometimes it's just watching a movie, right? Sometimes it's just like shut it off totally and just sit and watch a movie. And yeah, I think it's important that we as fathers recognize that and keep that priority and know when that time is, but then don't let that drift in. Like, you can't exercise all day long.
No, right? You can't.
You have to have the rule, those lines in place. Yeah,
absolutely. And I feel like you can't exercise all the time, but and you talk about these little specific times. What I've discovered recently is just going to go get gas. The cars will be empty, and I'm like, all right, hey, my daughter, hey, you're coming with me. We're gonna go get gas.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means you get a little treat or something, and sometimes
right.
you bribe them out. But some of the best conversations, these crystal conversations, are coming in the car when they're like, "Hey, Dad, I had this happen." And sometimes we get really deep. Dad, what's suicide? And you're like, "Whoa, I'm just gonna pick up some gas right now. I was not expecting you to talk about that."
Yeah.
And then you're like, you know what, this ride is gonna be a little bit longer now.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to go get the gas on the other side of town.
Yeah. And I think you talk about work time. I think it's really nice when you have that work time and you're like, yeah, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to work and I'm going to be very efficient at this because I know they're back in a little bit and I need to be there for them. And again, it's sometimes I call up Jen and I will say, hey, it's going to be a late night. No, it's going to be a late night. And she says, and I say, but we'll make up for it. We're going to do this weekend. We'll do this and this. And that the kids just say, kids are going to do homework this night or something like that. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trade-off.
And I think it varies different depending on the stage of life, right? Of course, you're not going to have a conversation about suicide taking your daughter to get gas if your daughter's 4 years old.
Right.
right? It's just about being with your dad. But now that she's a teenager, that conversation can happen. And I, there was a time when, I was working 12-hour days pretty typically, right? I mean, I'd leave at 6 a.m. I wouldn't get home until 6 p.m. or later. And I just didn't have time to be with my kids, and we would do things differently. Now my life's different. Things are changed, and we have different rules, different guidelines that help us navigate what my schedule's like now. My kids need more time now than they did. With
Absolutely.
two boys with special needs, some ways they're very easy to take care of. Other ways they take a ton of energy and time, right? It's just different. What have been the greatest challenges? If you were to say, these were the hardest things about being a dad and what you faced in being an entrepreneur and a dad, what would you say are the biggest challenges that you've had?
And it's so interesting how these challenges change from, physically being there, sicknesses when they're small, and the kids, I have a daughter with dyslexia, and I had dyslexia too when I was little, and they think, oh no, they're going to have to go through the same kind of stuff that I went through. And, these little things, and then you move up, and it just constantly trying to adapt. It's it's these times when you go to bed and you talk to your wife and you're like, wow, how do we get through this day? Oh, and then you go up and you're like, oh wait, there's more to this, and there's another day that we have to do more. Some of the biggest challenges I would say is really dealing with kid. This is going to sound weird, but I feel like our kids have so much opportunity now, and things. I'm not going to be that old man. Oh, it's so much easier. When I was a kid, we didn't have the internet kind of thing. But there is something about, it's a different, they learn they can learn everything they want on the internet. They don't need you for education or things like that. They come to you for different reasons. And we just had one last night where we had an experience where I feel like in these young kids and their immature brains, this is all they have. This is all they know. And something as small as a breakup can be a big deal and can be devastating to them. And you want to just shake them and say, don't shake the baby. But you want to just shake them and say, this too will pass. It's going to be okay. And I think that's the hardest thing is you can't take a 40-year-old's brain and put it in a 16-year-old and say, no, it will be okay. This is all they know. And that's our biggest challenges right now is trying to understand their emotions and trying to empathize with them, with where they're at. And I was thinking too about a thing where it's kind of like you meet them where they're at, and every kid is so different. I'm a big surfer, and I named my son Merrick. It means as a surfboard shaper out of Southern California. And I thought I'm going to be the best dad ever. I know all the great surfing spots. We're going to go surfing every summer, and he's going to love it. He could care less about it. and that's how parenting can be, is you just have these expectations and you want to be the best dad. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. And so my son really likes cubing. So I learned how to cube, and we went to a couple cubing contests. And then my son really enjoyed running. And it's a good thing I do enjoy running and doing sports. And we ran a half marathon together, and we'll do another marathon together. Meeting where I think that's one of those things is meeting them where they're at. And that's, I think, the challenge at times is finding just where are they at in this situation. And it's a lot different, and it's constantly adapting. As we talk about that, I think that's what it's kind of coming back to being a parent. It's hard. Being a good dad is hard. You have to adapt. You have to communicate. And my kids are telling me way more stuff than what I told my parents when I was a kid. and about relationships. Doesn't that surprise you that they're open? And you're like, hey, let's keep this channel open. What can I do so you keep on talking to me so we can keep on, keep this channel open?
And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you have to just listen and listen, and it's hard. It's just like listening to them talk about, like you mentioned, problems that are huge problems to them at 16 that as a 40-year-old you know how to deal with, and now, but you have to just listen and let them work their way through it. And I find that sometimes that's so hard. I'm like, okay, just keep on listening, right? Don't, as a man, you want to fix the problem, right? You want to be like, let's go fix it. This is what you do.
And you do, and the thing is, you do know because you have the experience. But you're right. Sometimes the kids just need to talk and listen. It's been fun having the kids learn how to drive, where you're in the car and you're just talking and you're just driving, and long stretches of road out here in Oregon. We got long stretches of road where you're out in nothing but Christmas tree and grass seeds, and you get to talk. And I've established, my daughter loves to listen to music, and we'll go with her every Sunday. We go on a Sunday drive and we travel around. And my son, I've also come to recognize too, that same son that I thought was going to be a surfing legend really, really understands my wife, and my wife understands him, and they sync together so well. And my daughter and I, it's just so seamless. And at first you want to fight that. And I know other people, you want to just be like, no, I can be it all. And then you think, no, you know what? Let's let this roll. Let's see what happens with this. Yeah.
I think that's pretty typical in a lot of relationships, or husband and wife and kids. You'll have children relate better to one parent than the other, and it is tough when you're not the parent that they relate to, and you want to have that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about a man where you want your son to be like you. I have 6 sisters and a brother, and my son is the only one carrying on my last name, the Scott name. And I feel like that's this huge pressure. And to me, it's a big deal. And I don't think my son appreciates what it is. But also, you just having one son, and you kind of you want the best for sure, but you also you feel like you always want to expel your knowledge on them. And sometimes it's not better to come through you, and sometimes it is through another person like your wife.
So we've talked about a lot of things. I think it's time to kind of wrap it up. We both got families to get back to.
Yeah.
We'll leave it this, we'll give you the last word. What would be the one piece of advice you would give a new dad that's just getting started? Maybe they've got kids, or maybe they're just getting started with kids. Maybe something you've already shared and just want to restate. But what would be kind of the one big key that you would want to share with a dad?
Overall talking, it seems like we've talked about, I think what's important is getting experiences. Experiences is where I feel like, for us at least, that's how our kids learn the best. I think also, we've also talked about, and it's been pretty clear that we have to be able to be adaptable. And when I look back, if I think about if I was younger, and what I'd wanted to know is that in my 20s and 30s, I feel like it's about working. If you want to be successful, there's a time where you have to put in the time, and you have to know there's no overnight success, and there will be jobs that are demanding, and you need to be there. You need to learn. And I feel like those 20s and 30s, you're learning. And even like the 30s to 40s, that's where you're like really establishing these experiences. This is what you want to do. And it's been so fun to see in the 40s now with the kids older to be like, okay, now it's like, this has been the magic family time, where now I start seeing, oh no, these kids have got 2 more years of school and they're out forever. It makes you really appreciate the times that you have, but also it makes you think that if you are strategic and if you are intentional about what you do, you can be successful. You can be a good dad. You can have what you desire. And it can work out. And that's what I would say is, I feel like if I was younger, I'd want to just know can it work? Can I do this? And it's interesting how the jobs become a little bit more streamlined, and you just learn more as a parent. And that becomes a little streamlined. You know what things are crystal or rubber, or you know when you really need to let down the hammer, and you learn when you need to listen. And it does get easier, and it's not just changing poopy diapers all the time.
But you have to change them, right?
But
like,
you have to.
It's like a job. You have to put in the work.
You do. Yeah.
Well, Tyson, thank you for taking time out of your busy life to share your experiences and your advice. I know there are many who will appreciate what you shared and will help them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I feel like I learned a lot about crystal and rubber, and it made me help to reflect the amazing experience, amazing opportunity to be a father. And it's just the best. I really enjoy it. It really is great. And I love what you're doing for other people. I'm super excited to hear other guests, not me, but other people that you bring on and other points of view. I love it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been the Dad Perfect podcast. Thank you for listening. If you want more, you can get it. More resources, more tips and strategies, more dads and moms sharing experiences, and much more. Simply go to DadPerfect.com and sign up. That's DadPerfect.com to sign up for more. Until next time, remember, you are the perfect dad for your family. You are Dad Perfect.